Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Problem Gambling and Gaming presentation. March is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. We're very excited to bring you this important information. My name is Kristin McConnell, and I'm the Director of the Prevention Council of Putnam. And joining me today is
Melissa LaChapelle. I am the Prevention Supervisor from CoveCare Center. Thank you for joining us. So again, today's topic is problem gambling and gaming. And I'm sure a lot of you are aware that gaming is becoming very popular amongst adolescents. And we're finding that gambling, there are more and more opportunities to gamble while playing games. So we're finding as gaming becomes more popular, so does gambling. So today we're going to discuss how the two are merging. We'll go through some definitions. We'll talk about the blurred lines and risks, some of the emerging trends, youth behaviors and risks, what is considered a problem when it comes to gambling and gaming, and then some ways to prevent it. So what is gambling? Gambling is when you risk something of value on a game of chance in the hope of a desired result, and some characteristics that define gambling. So there has to be a pay per action. A monetary payment must be made to be considered a gambling act. The outcome is chance-based. However, this does allow for some level of skill. There are prizes of value involved. It's regulated. So gambling is highly regulated, and part of that regulation is to protect the consumer. There are taxes and licensing fees involved, and it's highly profitable for the state that's regulating it. So some characteristics that define gaming, there are many variations. It's skill and chance-based. There's payment per entry, not per game, and there are no specific regulations. So when you think about gambling, if I were to ask you, when you think about gaming, what would come to mind? So most would say gambling is when you put down money in hopes to win more money, right? So you're risking something of value with the chance that you might win something better. And then gaming is playing a game for entertainment. However, we are finding that it's harder and harder to tell the difference between the two. So they're merging and the line is becoming blurred. And even if you look at this picture, you'll see on the left here, we have slot machines. And on the right is a picture of arcade games. They almost look identical. And like I was saying, there are more opportunities to gamble while playing games. So we're finding that they both have an option to risk valuables in hopes of an enhanced experience. So how is gambling appearing in games? So there are online gambling themed games, and then there are non-gambling themed games with a lot of gambling mechanisms built into them. So online gambling themed games, such as social casino games, these are simulated games that represent gambling opportunities, such as slot machines, blackjack, or poker. They're generally linked to social media accounts or advertised by social media. They're free to play, and they receive, so when you sign on, you receive a certain level of free chips or credit, but there's always an option to put real money down to hoping to win more money. There's no regulations, and they can advertise to whoever they want. And then, so non-gambling themed games we'll talk about in a minute. So those are like fantasy football, esports. They're not, you wouldn't exactly think of that they're gambling right away, but they do have a lot of gambling mechanisms built into them. But before we talk about that, we're going to talk about the concerns and risks involved with gambling within games. So we have inflated payouts and irrational beliefs. So the idea that these games are rigged, right? So the social casino games, they manipulate the player. When they sign on, they'll allow them to win a lot of money via the free credit. Then they'll lay off for a while. They'll say, oh, this person's not winning. Let's allow them to win even more money. So they manipulate them to think this game, that they're really good at the game, that they're going to win some real money here, a lot of money, and they'll make them almost want to put down some real money, not just play with the free credit. And we have normalization. So the idea that gambling is displayed as a social activity, there's an ability to interact with friends, share your skills. It makes gambling seem fun, a normal part of life and a social activity. We have favorable attitudes. So the idea that it's entertainment, it's a positive thing to do. Migration to gambling. So okay, I'm already playing all these games or gambling with these games, esports, my video games. I might as well go to the casino and play money on slot machines, play real money on slot machines. Another concern we have is developing a gambling or gaming problem. And then lastly, in-game spending. So spending money while playing games. So let's talk about some of the emerging technology, the emerging trends. We'll talk about cryptocurrency, esports, loot boxes, fantasy sports, and skins betting. So cryptocurrency, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, is a digital currency system of exchange that uses advanced cryptography for security. Bitcoin is one of the most popular types of digital currencies. There's a record of transaction maintained and new units of currency are generated. They operate independently of central banks. 9% of US teens have invested in cryptocurrency, which is a pretty high percentage. So we have fantasy sports and sports betting. Fantasy sports is a season-long competition in which participants select combinations of players in a league and score points based on each individual player's performance. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard of fantasy football. It's one of the most popular fantasy sports. You select a random group of players, you put together a team, you put money down, you have no idea how they're going to do throughout the season, but you win points based on how the players do. So you're risking something, right? Putting money down on these players. You don't know what the turnout's going to be, but you're hoping to win more money. So it is gambling. And then we have sports betting, which is betting money on real sports. It's becoming more and more accessible, because there's so many apps where you can go on and put money on different sports. Okay, esports are video games that are played in a highly organized competitive environment. So these can range from popular team-oriented online battles to single-player first-person shooters to reconstruction of physical sports. So basically, it will be people playing video games are competing against each other, and people are putting money or gambling on these people playing video games whom are competing. So viewership of traditional sports is declining while participating in esports skyrockets. And if you look at this graph, you'll see that the global esports market size, it was valued at 1.1 billion in 2019 and is expected to expand by 25% from 2020 to 2027. People consider it a professional career, and universities and colleges have started a dedicated curriculum for it. And in the US, there is actually over 100 schools, high schools, that have curriculums for esports. Okay, so we have skins betting. A skin is a graphic which changes the appearance of characters in video games. They're purely aesthetic. In skins gambling, gamers exchange virtual goods that they've won or bought for virtual gambling chips. Millions of dollars worth are being gambled each year, and much of it is by children and young people. If you look at this graph, you'll see that 77% of children who bet with skins, 23% of this 77% were at risk for developing a problem when it comes to gambling. Okay, so loot boxes. In a video game, a loot box is a consumable virtual item which can be redeemed to receive a randomized selection of further virtual items or loot, ranging from simple customization options for a player's avatar or character to game-changing equipment such as weapons and armor. So you make a payment for a chance-based item, you don't know what's in the loot box, and you get a virtual item to use within the game, and it usually helps you progress within the game. So basically, somebody will be playing a video game and a loot box will appear. They'll have the option to buy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You do have to pay with real money. You have no idea what's going to be inside of it, but it usually advances your avatar or the character that you play with. In the gaming world, there's a high social value to your avatar. So it's all about having a customized avatar. There's bullying associated with not having a customized avatar. So it's a big deal. You can actually buy and sell loot boxes. There's been evidence that an increased use of loot boxes is correlated with problem gambling behaviors, especially for adolescents who are already at risk. One of the most worrisome aspects is that 56% of games containing loot boxes are considered suitable for children aged 7 years and older, and 93% are considered suitable for children at least 12 years of age. Okay, so let's talk about the youth behaviors and risks. So young people are gambling. 39.5% of New York State youth between 12 and 17 have gambled in the past year. It's more commonly boys and older teens, and it ranges from informal things like scratch-offs and video games to more formal things like trading and fantasy sports. Oops, I'm just gonna go back a couple. So why are more and more adolescents gambling? It has to do with access and accessibility. So most adolescents have access to a smartphone. They have tablets, iPads, whatever it may be. There's hundreds of free apps with games available, video games, esports, trading apps. So it's more accessible now than ever. So this graph shows the percentage of New York State high school youth who played video or computer games for 3 or more hours a day. So you'll see in 2007, it was at about 30%. And in 2019, it's at 40%. So 40% of New York State high school youth played video or computer games for 3 or more hours a day. And this does not include screen time for schoolwork. Now we have to think about that percentage after the pandemic. When the research comes out after the pandemic, after we've been quarantined for a couple of years almost, right? I can only imagine that significantly increasing, which is concerning. So 30% of youth stated they began gambling at or before the age of 10, which I could not believe is such a young age. 30% of youth stated they began gambling at or before the age of 10. So there was a study appearing in the International Journal of Mental Health and Addiction done by Dr. Brent Conrad, and he revealed that 85% of teenagers play video games and that close to 10% of these teens may have habits indicative of problem gambling. So he surveyed 2,800 students in grades 7 through 12, and he used a problem video game playing scale to assess their computer use. So he asked the question, in the last 12 months, how often did you play video games, just to assess how frequently they were playing? And then to assess potential problematic gaming, he asked the following questions. When you were not playing video games, did you keep thinking about them, such as planning your next game, remembering past games? Did you spend an increasing amount of time playing video games? Did you try to control, cut back, or stop playing video games, or play for longer than you planned to? Did you get restless or irritated when you could not play video games? Did you skip school and work, or lie or steal, or argue with someone that you could play video games? And lastly, did you ignore homework or go to bed late, or spend less time with family and friends because of your video game playing? And from that, he found that 1 in 10 show behaviors indicative of problem gambling. Okay, so let's talk about some risk and protective factors. First, let's say, what is a risk factor? So risk factors are characteristics at the biological, psychological, family, community, or cultural level that are associated with the higher likelihood of negative outcomes. And then protective factors are characteristics associated with the lower likelihood of negative outcomes, or that reduce a risk factor's impact. So what are the risk and protective factors when it comes to problem gambling and gaming? So gender, we talked about males being more likely to develop a problem than females. Gambling activity, gaming activity, is it normalized in family, culture, community? The frequency or amount of gambling, lack of parental knowledge, and lastly, access. And then some protective factors are school opportunities, family attachment, family rewards, family opportunities, and social skills. So what makes adolescents more at risk for developing a problem? So as we know, our brains do not fully develop until the age of 25. Judgment is actually the last part to develop. And there's also tons of research stating that adolescents are more likely to take risks. So especially when there's a potential for a reward. Adolescents' brains release more dopamine compared to adults and children, making them more sensitive to rewards and good feelings that come from surprises and new experiences. Adolescents get more excited by risks. And this is the perfect storm when it comes to gambling, right? So they're taking a risk, they're putting out something they value, usually money. And when they do win, they experience a high, more than an adult would, just because they're at that level of where their brain is still developing. So just being an adolescent almost puts them at risk for developing a problem when it comes to gambling. So what is problem gambling? For most, gambling is fun. It's a recreational activity, but for some, it does become a problem, and it affects a lot of areas of their lives. And it can affect anyone regardless of age, gender, race, or social status. So when we define or think about what a problem is, these are some of the characteristics. Betting money you can't afford to lose, neglecting family, friends, work, and social obligations, neglecting themselves, ignoring the negative consequences, compromising their own personal values. So some warning signs of problem gambling: spending more time thinking about gambling, needing to gamble with more and more money, becoming restless or irritable when trying to cut back or stop gambling, gambling to escape problems or feelings of depression or anxiety, losing money by gambling and returning another day to get even, using credit cards for cash advances, lying to family or others about gambling, repeating unsuccessful attempts to control gambling or stop it, committing illegal acts to finance gambling, and lastly, risking or losing a significant relationship, job, educational, or career opportunity. So what are some of the consequences of underage gambling? We have higher rates of depression, increased risk of alcohol and substance abuse disorder, increased risk of suicide ideation and attempt, higher anxiety, poor general health, delinquency and crime, disruptive relationships, and poor academic performance. So gaming disorder. So problem gambling and gaming disorder are two different things. However, they do go hand in hand. Obviously, someone who's addicted to gaming, they're having more opportunities to gamble. They're also more likely to develop a problem when it comes to gambling. So in 2019, the World Health Organization officially recognized gaming disorder as a mental condition, adding the disorder to the International Classification of Diseases, or the ICD-11, the organization's official diagnostic manual. And some of the characteristics of gaming disorder are impaired control over gaming, prioritizing gaming over other previous interests and daily activities, and continuing to game despite the negative consequences. And these behaviors have to result in significant impairment for at least 12 months to be diagnosed. So let's talk about prevention. What can we do as parents? 85% of youth in grades 7 through 12 feel that their parents feel that it would be wrong for them to gamble. So research shows parents can make a difference in how their children respond to risky activities such as gambling. So best ways to guide your children away from problem gambling: talk to them and start early. Talk about gambling and other risky behaviors. Listen to what they have to say. Let them know that they can come to you and you will listen. Educate yourself and your kids. Establish family rules and enforce them. Monitor your children's activities, so know where they're going, who they're going with, who's driving. Ask them questions, as many questions, as much information as you can get. Get involved. Help your child develop coping skills, and demonstrate the behavior that you want your children to learn. So what are some talking tips? Look for some time to discuss the topic naturally. For example, after hearing an ad for the lottery or learning about someone who just won or lost money, ask questions first. Listen and learn what your child thinks about gambling before giving him information or telling them what to do or how to do something, or offering your opinions and thoughts. So gambling is a topic that can have many mixed messages. Be specific about your own values when you talk about gambling. Include problem gambling as part of the conversation with your child about the risks and dangers of alcohol and drug use. Be patient. It may take several discussions before your child understands the ideas that you want to convey and that gambling is a risky behavior. So some questions just to bring up the topic. How was school today? What games did you play with your friends? Why do you like the game so much? Is there any money involved? If so, what are you purchasing? What are other activities you are doing with your friends? And how late are you up at night? And what do you do with that time? And then lastly, set some boundaries. So enforce the limits and boundaries, change the Wi-Fi password, disconnect the internet, hide the controller, evaluate, is this plan working? What else can I do? And then we have some resources here, so you can always reach out, go on any of these sites and reach out to somebody, or myself and Kristin are here to help as well. We connect you to the right people. There's, again, tons of resources and information, and I hope this presentation was helpful. If you have any questions, we'll open up the presentation for questions. Or you could also email us directly. Again, we're happy to help.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm just going to add a couple things while the resources slide remains on the screen. I think, Melissa provided a lot of information and some really important tools to talk to your adolescent about problem gambling. And I thought I'd just provide a little bit of context and some localized information about what's going on in Putnam. So the reason why the Prevention Council and CoveCare Center are focusing on underage gambling during this time is, even though our agencies are both primarily focused on substance use and misuse prevention among adolescents, we do recognize there are other risky behaviors such as underage gambling that can impact the adolescent during their developing years. So one of the ways that we have been assessing the gambling use and gambling behavior, I should say, in Putnam are every 2 years in all of the middle and high schools in Putnam County, we administer what's called the Prevention Needs Assessment Youth Survey. And this is a risk and protective factor youth survey that was designed to measure the need for prevention services among youth in areas such as substance use, delinquency, antisocial behavior, and violence. And the questions on the survey ask youth about factors that place them at risk for substance use and other problem behaviors, such as problem gambling, along with factors that offer them protection from problem behaviors. The survey also does inquire about the use of alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, and participation in various antisocial behaviors. So as you heard Melissa just a few minutes ago touch on the risk and protective factors as they relate to problem gambling in young people, they really do connect to the other risky behaviors that I mentioned in the survey. So in Putnam County, over time, we have seen underage gambling behavior throughout all of our communities. However, it is on the decline, which is a good sign, but it's still so important to remain vigilant and aware of the issues that Melissa went through today. And just keep in mind that the trends are really changing from what they were even just a few years ago. And the pandemic only compounded the already difficult situation. So both of our agencies are really here to provide information and possibly a referral if you need it, or if you know someone that thinks that they need help with this issue. And just offer any guidance and support that we can. So we're going to put our emails in the chat and our phone numbers before we end today's presentation. And please feel free to reach out with information or should you have any further questions. Thanks.
Thank you.